Hello, I'm Thanassis Karalis from the University of Patras, from Greece, where I'm a professor of lifelong education and adult education and coordinator of the Center for Teaching and Learning. First of all, I would like to express my sincere gratitude to the organizing committee for this honorable invitation, which gives me the opportunity to address colleagues at a conference centered on a highly engaging issue. The main focus of my presentation is the notion and substance of lifelong learning, which, I argue, is not merely a new idea about how we learn, but a fundamentally different paradigm for learning and education, one paradigm that surpasses the current paradigmatic frameworks of education. Let me share my presentation, please. Back in 2007, I proposed the following definition of lifelong learning and education, a definition that significantly diverged from the mainstream interpretations at the time. What we see here is that lifelong learning and lifelong education is a different approach and perspective for perceiving, understanding, and designing everything related to learning, education, educational institutions, and the learner citizen, with continuity, with continuum, as the defining feature. Lifelong learning encompasses all learning and educational activities, regardless of type of content or level, taking place in formal, non-formal, and informal educational contexts. These activities involve citizens of all ages and educational backgrounds at any stage of their biological and social life cycle. This represents a fundamentally different conception of learning and education, grounded in the assumption of continuum, of continuity, in both the learning process and educational institutions. It rejects the idea of fixed starting points, of fixed endpoints, final destinations, predetermined pathways, or finalities in our learning journey throughout our lives. From this definition, it becomes clear that learning episodes and participation in educational activities do not constitute isolated islands, but rather small pieces of a continuous journey. One might argue that this is self-evident, but a closer analysis of educational institutions proves otherwise. Until about half a century ago, and even to this day, to a considerable extent, educational levels and types were carefully separated, each one of them serving a distinct and distinct function. What is clearly articulated in the definition, not just implied, but clearly articulated, is that lifelong learning represents a paradigmatic shift in the terms used by Thomas Kuhn. I will not delve into the concept of the scientific paradigm, but I will emphasize this. When one speaks of a paradigm shift, must explain why the shift has become necessary. That means identifying the causes of the change and pinpointing what Kuhn calls anomalies, irregularities, or contradictions in the current paradigm that no longer allow us to explain reality adequately. Such anomalies constitute violations for the normal, for the current, for the dominant paradigmatic structure, eventually leading to the formulation or even imposition of new interpretations. This view is present in academic literature, though still marginal and sometimes even considered heretical. I mean about lifelong education. In most cases, lifelong learning continues to be understood either as adult education or continuing vocational training. So, when did this notion of lifelong learning emerge? Here we can see a previous study with my colleague Chafu, where we showed that although the term lifelong learning appears in some references before 1970, Its widespread usage begins after that. From just 15 citations in 1970, it rises to about 26,000 citations in 2023 in article titles. One of the key reasons for the explosion is undoubtedly the 1972 publication of the UNESCO report entitled Learning to Be, commonly known as the Faux Report, by the name of the president of the committee. This marked a milestone in education policy, introducing the concept of lifelong education as a bold proposal for the complete reorganization of educational systems, centered on the concept of continuum as the driving principle of the proposed reform. In my view, this report serves as the foundational text of this new paradigm, arriving only a few years after another landmark publication, Philip Koop's The World Educational Crisis. In that work, Koop's introduced the widely used distinction between formal, non-formal, and informal education for the first time, giving institutional and systemic meaning to what had previously been considered incidental learning. I mean, the informal education. Learning that occurred through work, social interactions, leisure, and the media. Today, of course, Koop's should add the internet. The appearance of these ideas, the typology of educational activities, the concept of an educational crisis, and the UNESCO report were not random events. Rather, they were expressions of a broader crisis, not only of education itself, but of the existing educational paradigm. In this sense, the discourse about lifelong education is not just a response to isolated problems. It is a manifestation of the breakdown of the conventional educational model and the beginning of efforts to define and shape a new one. If we accept this, then we must also ask, why has the existing paradigm failed? Why, beginning as early as 1960 in the West, did the narrative of educational crisis gain such prominence? Is this merely a reflection of the general spirit of skepticism and social critique of the 60s? Or is there a deeper anomaly within the system? In my view, the anomaly is profound. Educational institutions have lost their ability to perform their assigned roles in capitalist societies, namely to ensure the division of labor and the transmission and reproduction of dominant ideology. If we reject the notion that educational institutions are timeless and neutral social structures, and instead examine why societies organize learning the way they do, especially since the Industrial Revolution and the rise of capitalism, we will see that education serves three core functions, according both to Marxist or functionist approaches. First of all is the division of labor and reproduction of social inequality. According to Marxist and conflict theories, education reproduces inequality. Access to certain educational levels determines access to specific jobs, reinforcing the existing social order. But also, we have functionalist theories that they see it as a means of social harmony and cohesion, but the result is structurally similar. Second, transmission of dominant ideology, thus the worldview and values of the ruling social classes. In functionalist terms, this is referred to as the transmission of cultural tradition. And another role that serves the educational system is a custodial function, the custodian role. Education serves as a mechanism for the periodic withdrawal and storage of the labor force, school as supervision and containment. Does the system work? Yes, and for nearly 1 century, education was considered the primary elevator or of upward social mobility, provided that one could enter the system and earn the right certificates. These certificates functioned as tickets, granting access to the next floor in the hierarchy. The key was always the level just above the mass access level. That level, the level that masses have access, became the centrifugal level, the one that opened access to higher status, better paying positions. But this mechanism began to fail as massification progressed. Once large numbers of people started obtaining the rare certificate once upon a time, those certificates lost their exclusionary power. I have called the 20th century the golden age of education. From the late of 80 until the 1970s or the 1990s in countries like Greece, for example, education expanded through 3 major waves. When we had illiterates, 88%, nowadays we have 12%. Access to primary education. Please look at those data about the access to primary education in United Kingdom, India, and China. And also, this is the first massification wave. Then we had the second massification wave of 1930 for the secondary education, and about 1960 we had the massification wave for higher education. At the beginning of 20th century, less than 1% had access to higher education, while at nowadays we have about 40%. But this massification of education created a paradox. As access increased, education lost its power to select. The centrifugal level could no longer filter and certify elites, and the social elevator became overloaded. Talking about massification and its implications to higher education institutions, we all experience that students at the universities are not at the same level as they used to be half a century ago. That's why we need new approaches to teaching and learning in higher education. I am recording now my presentation at the Center of Teaching and Learning of the University of Patras, where we can see that we have created in the past 10 years. I was appointed by the Senate of the University of Patras as a coordinator, and the past 2 years, we participate in an Erasmus Plus project called Magnet, through which we have created the Balkan ETAP, a network for Balkan countries, but not only for Balkan countries, for a cooperation in the field of teaching and learning in higher education. So any colleague or university wanting to cooperate in the field of teaching and learning in higher education is welcome on board in this Balkan ETAP network. That was a small parenthesis. The educational system can no longer fulfill its role in the division of labor, nor as the ideological filter of society. Only one faction remains largely intact, the custodian role of education. The consequences of massification, which render the previous educational paradigm inadequate, and push us to seek a fundamentally new conception. If we are indeed operating within this new paradigm, or at least if we try to transition toward one new, then our task is not only to identify the anomalies of the current model, but also to examine What is newly explainable within this new framework? Let us begin with the credentialing of learning and qualifications. If we accept that traditional certification systems have become inflated and lost their signaling value, then we must ask, what is the new currency in the labor market? What serves as the signaling mechanism from supply, from job seeker, to demand, to employer? My position is that this new currency will be skills, and more specifically, systems for documenting, displaying, and accumulating skills across a person's lifetime. Here, as you can say, adopt a view of a colleague from Greece, Ligeris of 2020, who defines skill in a dynamic, inclusive, and multi-dimensional way that goes beyond the traditional separation between knowledge, technical ability, and behavior. In this sense, you can see here the definition. A skill at any point in time of our life is nothing more than the accumulated expression of a person's qualifications measured against a specific task or job requirement, whether in professional or personal life. Therefore, we are not witnessing a simplistic shift from knowledge to skills, or a move toward merely technical or instrumental education when dealing with skills. Rather, we are seeing a change in the signaling system from certificates to actual demonstrable capability, and a transformation in how the entire learning outcomes is recorded, not just the outcome of formal schooling. Closely related to this is the growing emphasis on soft skills and the overwhelming demand for them. Soft skills have always been important, but today they are seen as differentiators among candidates with similar formal qualifications. That does not mean hard skills are obsolete. Far from it. It simply means that there is now a surplus of formally qualified individuals, and soft skills have become a way to stand out. Within this evolving context, we must include the development of systems for the recognition and validation of prior learning, APL systems, a trend that began in the 1970s and has been expanded. We must also consider mechanisms like skill portfolios, e-portfolios, digital badges, micro-credential. These are all emerging as tools attempting to restore the signaling function of qualification in a new educational framework. Notably, the fact is that micro-credentials and badges are far more advanced in the US than in Europe. While these are promising developments, they are not yet mature systems. And in many cases, they create more noise in the signaling process than clarity. A learner must accumulate dozens of certificates and badges of varying value and recognition, making it more difficult for employers to assess the true skills and qualifications of the individual. This introduces another serious problem: the emergence of private accreditation bodies, sometimes unregulated, that awards credential even for critical skills and occupational competencies without state supervision. What we truly need is a unified system for documenting qualification and skills, integrating formal, non-formal, and informal learning outcomes into a single framework that can serve as an effective signaling mechanism. This would be the equivalent of what school diplomas and degrees used to do in the traditional system. In this interpretation, the rise of new credentialing tools is not a sign of educational system decline, but rather an attempt to build the infrastructure of a new educational paradigm. An effective future credential may include, for example, a formal degree, for example, engineering diploma, 2, 3 completed MOOCs, and hands-on experience with cutting-edge technologies. There are 2 ways that this could develop a unified verifiable credential, converting credentials into skills, or converting skills into credentials, or a third maybe solution of converting both into something new we don't still know. Please allow me now to turn into the issue of inequality. The history of education is fundamentally a history of inequality. At first, inequalities manifested as access gaps, education for the few. As access expanded, we enter a phase of education for all, but not equally accessible to all. This distinction lies in the concept of educational opportunity, the extent to which learners can actually access the resources provided. This concern was already emphasized in the 70s by a scholar from India, Ravindra Dev, who defined 3 prerequisites for lifelong learning: opportunity, motivation, and educability. Here, opportunity refers not just to availability, but to real accessibility. And educability refers to the learner's capacity to engage with what's offered on an equal footing. Now let us return to citizenship and the broader civic function of adult education. That is to say, adult education beyond reskilling and upskilling. During the COVID-19 pandemic, we saw widespread confusion and misinformation about even basic scientific concepts. For example, many people misunderstood the difference between DNA and mRNA, leading them to believe that the mRNA vaccines would alter their DNA. Here, a lack of basic biological knowledge nearly undermined a major scientific breakthrough. The almost immediate production of vaccines created fertile ground for conspiracy theories and put public health at risk. Likewise, financial literacy prevents citizens from understanding global economic forces and makes them vulnerable to manipulation. Media literacy makes it difficult to distinguish facts from fake news. Environmental literacy prevents meaningful responses to climate change, particularly in vulnerable regions like the Mediterranean, as we had the chance to see this summer in our Mediterranean countries with all these mega fires, which hit not only Greece or Italy, but mainly Spain and Portugal. New and evolving forms of literacy, scientific literacy, financial, health, media literacy, environmental, are now crucial to active citizenship. Therefore, adult education today plays a role that extends far beyond upskilling or reskilling. It is fundamental to democratic resilience and the very survival of humanity. Thank you for attending my presentation. Once again, I would like to thank the organizers for their honorable invitation, and I would be very happy if you could send me any kind of feedback at my email, Karalis, upatras.gr. You could see the mail in the last PowerPoint slide. Thank you very much.